Hello, you are listening to NPE Stories. This is a podcast where NPEs can share their story. I am your host, Lily, and I found out I was an NPE through an ancestry DNA test that changed my life forever. NPE is a term that stands for Not Parent Expected or Non-Paternal Event. This means that one or more of our parents are not who we believe them to be. NPE Stories is a podcast where NPEs can share their story of what their original family was like, how they found out they were an NPE, and what their journey has been like since the day they found out. Hi, welcome to Season 7 of NPE Stories. This is actually Year 7, but I originally thought seasons were a year long, so I just call it Season 7. I am Lily Wood. I'm an NPE. I found out I was an NPE April 9th, 2019. I do not have any credentials, right? I have no mental health training. So let's get that straight right off the bat. I don't have any therapy background. I'm not an expert in anything. I'm just a normal NPE, and I started this podcast because I wanted to hear other NPE stories. All right. So I am just a service worker. Honestly, if you're an NPE and you're listening, you could probably do a better job than me at this. I am not much of a host. I mostly listen, and I'm happy to volunteer my time to schedule, record, and edit these podcasts. Mostly I am quiet during these episodes and I listen. Occasionally you will find an episode where I have a back and forth dialogue, and that's either at the request of my guest, perhaps they wanted a conversation, or it just naturally happened. So let's talk a little bit about my guests and seeing if you're interested in being one. I currently have a long wait list. It is about 60 people long. My seasons are from August through June, so I only take July off. So if you wanted to get on the wait list, that means if you do the math, you would probably have about a year and a half long wait. Now, again, you can still put your name on the wait list. And if at that time you want it removed or you no longer feel like sharing, we will just take you off. I just thought that was fair. When I first came up with this podcast, I just went in order of emails received because it felt fair. My only requirements were that you had to be an NPE. So that also includes LDAs, late discovery adoptees, and our DCPs, the late discovery donor conceived people. You do not have to be an expert. You do not have to be a great storyteller. You can just be a normal person. That's not to say I don't frequently have on experts. Every so often, I'll have on an author or a filmmaker or someone that sounds really professional. And that's just by chance. I don't vet people beforehand. And the format of this podcast allows people to share their story and to share their experience and what happened to them. You can take what helps you and leave what doesn't. Sometimes people have tried different modalities for their healing, and it's really helpful. They might provide resources, groups that they've joined, books that they've read, films that they've watched. I will always link whatever they mention down below if I can find an easily accessible link. A lot of this podcast is sharing resources. Nearly every other week, I'll provide a resource. And that is just one that came across my desk or one that I use personally. For instance, off the top of my head, I can think of two resources I've used a lot, and that is the organizations Right to Know and Severance Magazine. Right to Know puts on an Untangling Our Roots Summit every other year. Man, it was absolutely life-changing for me to go to that. Right to Know has so many resources. They have a webinar that I've been part of many times. It's like a Zoom call, and you can just sit and listen, or you can participate. They'll bring on different people to share information that can be helpful to our community. I've also read many articles on Severance magazine. I have forwarded their article. Oh, let's see, what's it called? I think it's called 10 Things Not to Say to an NPE. I cannot even begin to say how many times I have forwarded that article. And they have many other stories that have been very, very helpful for me in my journey. So that's just a little background on NPE stories. I believe we might have some new listeners, and so I just wanted to make just a little announcement. Some of this is information you already know. I do not make money on this podcast. I have never taken advertising, and I've never taken sponsorship. That's not to say that wouldn't change in the future, because this is my labor of love. But that is just how this podcast has worked for now. I do have a Patreon page, and I do accept donations. Thank you so much to the dozen of you that have given me donations. I really appreciate it. Okay, I think that's enough information for now. Now let's get into our NPE story this week. And welcome to episode 221. This is a new season. This is season 7, also known as year 7. And I have on an NPE right now. I believe it's an NPE. Today I am speaking with Liz. Hi, Liz.
Hi, Lily. Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, of course. Thank you for your wait, your patience, and thank you for doing this today.
No, I really appreciate this space. And I haven't told my story too many times. So I'm hoping this will also help me in the process. And maybe some of your listeners will resonate. And the same way I have related to so many of your guests.
Oh, that's wonderful. And yes, I mean, I get emails all the time from people brand new that have somehow found this podcast, and they get so much out of listening to other people's stories. So you're an NPE, right?
Yes.
Okay. I only ask that because sometimes we have on late discovery adoptees or late discovery donor conceived individuals. And I don't ever get the backstory, or I try not to look at the backstory just so I can listen for the first time, just like I'm one of the listeners. So if I need to clarify anything, I'll just kind of cut in every so often. Okay, so let's get an understanding of your family of origin. Who was in your raising family, and what was that like?
So I grew up in Mexico in a border town, but I was actually born in the US. I lived in Mexico until I was 16 years old. I was an only child. My dad, he is from a state very south in Mexico, so we never really saw his family. They tell me that I saw my grandparents twice as a kid, and I don't remember. And as far as I know, my dad, he left his house when he was a teen. So he didn't have a stable home. And I remember as a kid, he was very grumbling and had no patience and a really bad temper. That's kind of how I remember. And my mom, the youngest of 5, but there was a big gap between her and her siblings. When she was born, some of her siblings already had kids. So she's younger than some of her nieces and nephews. And I didn't get to meet my grandmother or grandfather from my mom's side. And we weren't close to any family. So basically it was just my parents and me. That was until I was around 11. That's when they separated. So at that point it became just my mom and me.
Was your birth certificate father, that's what I call raising dad, was he still part of your life after the age of 11?
Well, this is the dad that raised me, and we had a very difficult relationship all throughout, but especially after they separated. He would be in and out of my life. He would come see me. He would be very present for a few months, and then he would disappear for months and I wouldn't see him or hear from him or anything. And then all of a sudden he would contact me again, and we would do that on and off, for years. Still now, that's the case.
Yeah. And how about you and your mom? So it sounds like it was just you two in your teenage years.
So it's strange to try to explain my relationship with my mom. Most would say that we had a good relationship and healthy, but it has always been very secretive. There was a lot of things that I didn't want to share with her. And, later on I found out that was the same for her. But we weren't really open. We were very superficial. But she was loving and supportive. But again, very superficial. Not too many deep conversations or anything.
Did you ever have any warning signs when you were younger that you might eventually find out you're an NPE?
So I always had a feeling that something wasn't right. And I can start by one of my first memories. I was around 5 years old. I was in first grade. And I'll give you a little bit of context. In Mexico, everybody has two last names. So your first last name comes from your dad, and your second last name comes from your mom, which at the same time comes from her dad, if that makes sense.
Yes.
I remember always going shopping to the US with my mom. And because I was born in the US, she would always carry my ID. So we would enter the country. And I just knew that my ID that she would carry it didn't have the same last names as the last names I would use in school. And I was very young and I didn't ask too many questions, but it was just something that I knew. I probably didn't pay too much attention. It was always like in the back of my mind. But when I started elementary school and I was in first grade, I remember that the teacher wanted to talk to my mom. And he basically told her that I was having a lot of trouble writing my full name, that I kept writing different last names every time and that I would like switch them. And he wasn't sure why that was happening, but if my mom could talk to me about it and maybe like go over my full name at home and practice. So I think she might have said something to my dad, because I remember my dad talked to me, not my mom. And he kind of explained last names. And he told me that I couldn't have both of his last names because that would mean that we are siblings. That my first last name was his last name and that my second last name was my mom's last name. And again, I could hear what he was saying, but I just knew that didn't make sense because I've seen my ID with a different name. So I did tell him, I asked, I said, why is it different sometimes, and I remember, and, it's been so many years later, and I still remember he told me, and he looked kind of upset that I was asking. He said, that is something you don't need to worry about. It's for your own good. And I kind of learned that it was a topic I didn't need to be asking questions about. I probably asked once again, not sure if it was like months later or a few years later, and I asked my mom and basically got a very similar answer. And I don't remember asking ever again about it. So that was like the first memory I have where I knew something wasn't right. Another memory I have is when I was in third grade. I was in school and there was no school break or anything, but my parents planned a trip. So I had to miss school to go on this trip. And we were there for, I would say, about a week. And one day we go to this very small town and it's in the middle of nowhere. All I could see is fields and just one building, one very small building. It kind of looked like a house. We go into this building, and inside looks like an office, and I can see there's a desk and a secretary, and we're in a waiting room. She opens a door and tells us that we're able to go in now. We go inside. There's another desk and this guy, and the secretary sits next to him, and she has a typewriter. I don't know how the conversation started, but this guy turns and looks at me, and then he asks me what I want my name to be. So I didn't know what he meant. I just looked at my parents, and my dad tells him that my name's Lizette, and he says my last name, using his first last name and then using my mom's first last name. So then the guy looks at me, and this whole time the secretary is typing on the typewriter. The guy looks at me again, and then he asks when I want what birthday I want. And I was born in November, so that's what I said, that I was born in November. And he says, okay, well, your birthday will be November 20th. And November 20th is the Mexican Revolution. So he starts laughing, and he says, that way you'll be very Mexican. And then he says, girls like to take years off their age. So let's get started. I was actually born in 1989. So he turns and tells the secretary, 1990. And
so strange.
So I didn't ask any questions. I was in third grade. I didn't know what was happening. And that was the end of that. We went back home. I went back to school and kind of forgot about it. So after that, my parents divorced, and I switched to a different school. Nothing major happened there. Still using my dad's last name and my mom's last name. And then I go to high school. So in Mexico, high school is not mandatory. So they treat you like an adult. You do the whole enrollment process by yourself. I don't even think parents are allowed to go. So I had to bring my birth certificate with me, all my transcripts and everything. And looking at my birth certificate, I start thinking about everything that had happened. I remember how we got it. That was the birth certificate that I got from that one trip we made when I was in third grade. So it was kind of like a reminder that I was not born that day. I was not born that year. And I was not born in that town. So again, it's kind of like fresh in my memory at this point that something's not right. But I didn't dare to ask questions. And I'll tell you another piece. So for context, my mom, I mentioned she was the very last of 5, but she didn't share the same father as her siblings. And the story that I've been told is that when she was born, my grandmother didn't want my mom's father's name on her birth certificate. So she didn't put any name under father. And my mom only had one last name, and it was my grandmother's last name. And back in the day, only having one last name had a lot of stigma to it. So I know, and I've seen plenty of documents that my mom has where she has 2 last names, or she only has my grandma's last name, or maybe they're flipped. So I was very used to last names not being so static or changing or not really being unique. So I kind of normalize having messy documents with all kinds of random last names. So again, I'm in high school, and at this point I'm around 14, 15, and I start thinking about college. And I didn't love the local college. So I started to think about different options. And knowing that I was born in the US, I figured going to a school on the other side of the border would be closer than going to a different state. And I would be closer to home. So I start talking to my mom about it, if she thinks it's a good idea. And she supports anything and everything that has to do with my education. So she was on board with that idea of me going to college in the US. But I was thinking it would be easier to finish high school in the US and then applying to colleges than just graduating high school and then trying to figure out how to enroll at a university and having to do that as an international student. Like, I figured it would be more difficult. So I tell her that I would like to finish high school in the US. And we talked to some friends that lived on this other side of the border. And they kind of give me a breakdown of the things I will have to have in order before starting high school here, and the places I would need to go. I would have to have my immunizations up to date and having my ID current, all that type of thing. And I was very independent, and I would get out of school very early, like around noon. And my mom worked, so I figured I could do it by myself. And she was okay with it. So she gave me this briefcase where she would keep all my important documents. And it was the first time that I was able to look at my original birth certificate. I had never really seen it or taken the time to read it. And at this point, I'm by myself with this briefcase full of paperwork. And I read it. And I think it's the first time that I see the two last names that I remembered from when I was 5. And I also see under father, there's a name that I've never seen before. It's not my dad's name. I don't see any of his last names. But I don't think this person could be real. I mean, I've never heard of this person before. How can it be real?
This document with this different father's name, do you remember, was it like another birth certificate?
Yes. So it was my American birth certificate.
Mm-hmm.
And I also knew I had this other birth certificate that we got from when I was in 3rd grade.
Oh, yes.
And that other one was Mexican, a Mexican birth certificate with a different birthday and different birth year. When I read that other name on the American birth certificate, I do wonder if I'm adopted. And I do tell a couple friends, probably like 2 friends of mine. I tell them the story and I tell them, like, do you think I'm adopted? But they both tell me that I look just like my mom, that I can't be adopted. So I thought maybe I was related to my mom, but maybe she wasn't my mom. And I didn't know what else to think. My dad, he would always get in trouble and he would drink a lot sometimes. And I thought maybe he had changed his name, and that in my head that could make sense. It wasn't totally crazy, especially knowing that we went to somewhere in Mexico and they changed my birth date. I was like, maybe he changed his name. and they don't want to tell me about it. Maybe he got in trouble and he doesn't want people to know his actual name. So of course in my head all of these make more sense, right? Than having a different father. So in the whole process of getting a new ID and my immunization card and all that, I see other pieces of papers. I see that my mom kept a bunch of like discharge papers. So I go through this briefcase and I see other documents, and there's like discharge papers from when my mom was pregnant with me and like ultrasounds, that type of thing. So anything and everything that had to do with me, it was in that briefcase. And I'm not sure if it was then or it was later. But I find two other pieces to the puzzle. And I think I was already in my 20s that I found this small paper in there. And they were requesting 2 copies of my US birth certificate. And they had an address, a mailing address. And the address was about 2 hours away from where I lived. And it was signed. And it was signed by that person on my American birth certificate. So that's the first time that I start to think that this person's not fake, that this person is real, and that my mom knows this person. Because why would she have that and it's signed by this person? Again, I'm in my 20s and I find another piece of paper. I don't know if I would do this when my mom wasn't looking or when, but all of a sudden I would find another piece to the puzzle. And this time I found this little card, and it was like an eye exam where they give you your like results. And I didn't know that when you need a special driver license to drive like a special type of vehicle, they ask for a different eye exam. And again, it was signed by that person. So in my mid-20s, I'm dating this boyfriend who is now my husband, and I tell him the story. I decide to tell him everything. And at this point we're older, probably 24, 25. And I've never really told the story to that many people, just those 2 friends when I was in my teen years, and now this boyfriend. And it's so funny to me because I always thought the story was so complicated and so mysterious, and it just wasn't clear. And then he just looks at me and he's like, "Why don't you ask your mom?" And I was like, "You're right. Like, I'm an adult now. Why can't I just ask my mom?" But I always, thinking about that topic, I felt like that 5-year-old that couldn't ask any questions. So it was so groundbreaking to hear that I could just ask my mom. And I was having a little bit of an existential crisis. I felt like I didn't know where I came from. My dad, he's still in and out of the picture and is very draining. I never knew if I needed to try harder and try to have a better relationship with him or if it wasn't worth it. So I decide to go on a trip, and I wanted to bring my mom with me. And I decide to go to Mexico City. And from there, I wanted to go to my dad's hometown and visit my relatives. And I was actually hoping to learn more about him. He left his house so young that he never really talked about his house or his family. So I figured that would help me feel better as well, knowing more about my background and where my parents come from. So I go in this trip, and I think at this point I'm 27. we go visit my relatives, and they bring me pictures of when my dad was little, and they tell me stories, and that's exactly what I wanted. I was craving all that stories. And I'm staying at a hotel with my mom. We eat breakfast every morning, and then we get ready and hang out with my cousins and visit places. And all I could think about is my now husband, back then boyfriend, telling me, "Why don't you just ask your mom?" I kept hearing that. And one morning we're eating breakfast, and I asked my mom. I asked, "Why do I have a birth certificate that doesn't have my dad's name?" And she tells me, "You know why." And I was so confused. That's all I could feel, confusion. I'm like, "What? What do you mean?" Like, I know. Like, so I start thinking of different scenarios. And I remember thinking, well, probably when my mom got pregnant and my dad found out, he didn't want to be in the picture, and he just disappeared, because he does that. So I tell her, like, he didn't want to be my dad, and he just disappeared, and you just put a different last name so I wouldn't struggle like you did with one last name. And she just says, "No, you know why. You're smart. You know why." So she didn't want to tell me. And I think again, and I'm like, okay, I don't think I'm adopted. So then I say out loud, "He's not my dad." And then she just nods, and I start crying. And even right now, thinking about it is wild, because it makes perfect sense. And it was clear all along. I just didn't want to see it. But I couldn't talk anymore. I was just crying. And I think my mom had the need to explain a little more. So she tells me that my biological father is a good man, but he wasn't ready to be my dad, and that he's really smart, and that my dad, the one that raised me, he couldn't have any children, so he was more than happy to be my dad, and that he is my dad. And she also says that they both promised to never tell me. And my mom asked me to not tell my dad that I knew. So I don't question anything, because I'm used to not asking questions. And the end of that trip was very unexpected for me, but in a sense, I got some of what I wanted. I wanted to know where I came from. I didn't really know where I came from, but I understood where I did not come from. And to me, that was huge, because for years I knew something didn't add up. And until this point, it was a little more clear. I did have questions, but it was a little more clear. And I was feeling very betrayed, not as the daughter of my mom and dad, but I was feeling betrayed as in my intelligence was betrayed, as if they really thought I was never going to ask again, or as if they didn't think I could put it together at some point. And I don't think they did a great job at hiding it. I feel like my mom maybe deep down wanted me to know, and that's why she would give me this briefcase and had all these documents in it. I think that was intentional. And I even now feel silly for not asking. I feel like I could have asked one more time, in all those decades. And I would have had the answers sooner. I think my mom wanted me to know and was willing to answer. I just was too scared to ask.
How were you doing the following weeks after that trip?
I felt like I was drowning in my doubts and my questions, and I felt like I couldn't ask anything. I think that's a learned behavior. I think I was too young when I was shut down when I tried to ask something, and I would be scared asking questions even at this point that I'm 20 or that I was 27. I felt like I were to be doing something wrong if I was asking questions. I also felt like maybe my mom wasn't going to be truthful, and I was scared to be lied to again. So I kept all my questions, I kept all my doubts, and I talked to my boyfriend. And it might have been the first day that I was back from the trip that I told him I wanted to see him. I wanted to talk to him. I didn't know who else to ask. Like I said, growing up, I didn't have my family around. So there wasn't like a family member I could go and ask more questions to. So at this point, I just wanted to vent and maybe get a new perspective. And I see my boyfriend, and I remember we were really hungry, or he was more hungry than I was. And I was telling him that I wanted to tell him something important about the trip. And he's like, oh, wait till we eat. And I was like, I really want to tell you now. And he's like, okay. And he was driving. He's like, what happened? And I tell him, my dad's not my dad. And I start crying again. And he's like, oh my goodness. Like it makes sense. Like you can't be surprised. And I'm like, yes, I'm not surprised, but I just didn't want to see it all these years. I I even felt like I couldn't show much emotion around my mom. Um, I think it all stems from being a child and not being allowed to fully express anything, not even questions, basic questions like your last names. So around my mom, I just wanted to be normal, like nothing happened. But the only thing I could think of at that point was to go on Google. So I go on Google, I have pictures of all those pieces to the puzzle that I had collected throughout the years. And it's actually very easy to get information about people online. I was very surprised. It was very eye opening. So I get access to public records, and I'm looking for people with that name, with my father's name on my birth certificate, the American one. I put his name and I'm trying to find the address where he had requested my birth certificates. And I do find people, but it's hard to know if anybody is that person. So the the next thing I think of is to go on Facebook. And I type his full name because he's also Mexican. He has two last names. And I only find two people. So the odds are much better. And I go and I see that both of these guys have, under their relatives, they have daughters. So each one had one. So I'm just looking at pictures and names and everything, and I click on one of the daughter's profile and I can see she's married with kids, and I'm like, okay, let's take a look at the other one. So I go on the other profile and I go to that guy's daughter profile, and when I look at her picture, is like looking at a mirror, and I can just feel cold head to toe. Why does this girl look just like me? It was pretty exciting, but scary. I didn't know what it meant. And I take a screenshot and I send it to my boyfriend. He doesn't say much, just gives it a like. And then I ask, does she look like me? And he replies, what? I thought it was you.
Oh my. Oh, wow.
And I get chills. I'm now convinced that this girl has to be my sister. She looks just like me. So I'm feeling very overwhelmed. I don't know what's the proper step after this. And I don't want to scare her either. I know it's a big piece of information that I just don't want to throw on somebody. I start thinking about how I could message her, what I can say to her. Because if I didn't know, and I'm 27 years old, she probably doesn't know either. And if for me something didn't feel right all these years, I don't think she would ever have a clue. So I didn't want to cause any drama. I wanted to be very mindful. And I started brainstorming what's the better way to approach her. Because out of this whole story, the most exciting part was having siblings. I was an only child, and it was my dream to have siblings. I thought it would be so fun. So I was very excited, but I didn't know if she was going to be excited. I asked my boyfriend again, because he's the only person that knows I'm going through this. What do I do? What's the best way to ask her or to talk to her? So he tells me that he thinks it's best to be sweet and short and just send her a brief message. So I decide to take a picture of my birth certificate and I send it to her, and I only say, I think we might be related. So that way, she can come up with a story on her own, and I don't have to give her much details unless she's interested. So that's what I do. And I'm an overthinker. So I can't decide when to do this. I don't want to do it on a weekday because I don't want to ruin her week. And if she goes to work, I don't want her to be stressed about this. So I'm like, okay, it has to be on a weekend. And I'm like, okay, but not on a Friday because then all weekend she's going to be stressing. So maybe on a Saturday, maybe on a Sunday. So I remember it was a long weekend, like a 3-day weekend. And I was like, okay, this is the right time because I can send it on a Sunday and she's probably not doing anything crazy on that Monday. Again, an overthinker. So I send it Sunday night. I'm like, she can go to sleep and then see it Monday morning. I send it, go to sleep, and I'm hoping that she responds in the morning. In the morning, I wake up, I go check my messages, and she blocked me.
Oh.
So,
Oh no,
I
I'm
was
sorry.
a little bit sad, but I knew I wasn't losing anything. I never had a sister before. It's not like I was losing one.
Okay.
So, a little bit later, I get a message from a guy. And this guy tells me that he's my brother. He says that our sister sent him my message, and that when he saw my birth certificate, he knew it was real, and that for him, it would explain a lot of things from his childhood. And he said he was very excited to know that he had another sister, and that if I was interested in talking, he would love to get to know me. So we FaceTime that same day. And he's so eager to have another sister. It was wild. He tells me his whole life story. He tells me about all the relatives we have, every single one of them. And he asks all these questions about me. He wanted to know everything. And later on that same day, he makes a three-way phone call with my sister, him and me. And I could hear a little bit of hesitation from my sister's end. She originally thought it was a scam. That's why she blocked me.
Uh-huh.
And she lives with my dad, my biological father, and her mom. And my brother, he lives several hours away, like 7-8 hours. So he's not in town often. He comes once or twice a year. And he moved out there when he was 17 to go to college. So he's a little detached from his mom and dad. But my sister sharing a home, I could see how this whole thing can be shocking. And she never really shared if she could sense something was wrong, but my brother has. He says that their father, or our father, was very absent, and not just literally absent, but mentally absent.
Mm-hmm.
He was very quiet and secluded a lot of the times. And he says that he thinks it was knowing that he had another daughter out there, and he wasn't having a relationship with that daughter. Both my siblings are older than me. My brother's 2 years older, and my sister's 3 years older. So we're very close in age. And
but they're older than you.
they're older than me.
Okay.
So here's the other part. Again, I didn't want to tell my mom about this. I still don't know if she knows about these siblings. So my brother came to town. He wanted to meet me, and he wanted to talk to his parents. So it was so mind-blowing to me that he just got home and asked about another sister. And he didn't even think twice about asking. And I'm over here still wondering what I should be asking or not asking. So he asked both his parents about me and what was the story. So he tells me that their mom took over the conversation, and she said that was the first and last time she was going to speak about it. And they were not allowed to have a relationship with me. She didn't want to hear anything about me ever again. And my dad, or my bio father, was next to her, and she's the one telling the story. So she says that my father was a truck driver back in the day and met my mom at a mini market in Mexico. I'm assuming, I don't know exactly, I don't think that was the word she used, but they were in a relationship, my mom and my bio father. At some point, I think my mom was grieving. I think that was mentioned. So I'm thinking that's probably when my grandmother passed away. And at some point, my mom got pregnant, and my father, my bio father, knew and was very conflicted. And I'm thinking he was very conflicted because he was married and with 2 kids, and my 2 siblings were probably 1 and 2. So he didn't know what to do, and he did tell his wife about it. And he went to his brother's house, which is about 2 hours away. And I'm thinking that's the address that I found on that piece of paper where he requested my birth certificate. I don't know for how long he stayed there. And at some point he got back, and he looked for my mom, and I think he wanted to meet me. But apparently when he got back, my mom was already with my dad, the one that raised me. So I don't know the time frame. I don't know for how long he was gone, or if he left when I was already born or right before. I'm not sure of that. I just know that when he got back, my mom was already with my dad, the one that raised me. And as far as I know, I think my mom mentioned that I was 2 when my dad came into the picture. But again, I don't know if that's the truth. I don't believe much of what my mom says. And that when my bio dad or bio father came back and talked to my mom, apparently she had a restraining order and that he wasn't allowed to see me, and that he got the restraining order so he wouldn't have any rights over me. So my bio father didn't ever look for me because he thought he wasn't allowed to legally. That's what the story says. And that when doing the math, I was 18 and I never looked for him, that he assumed I didn't want a relationship with him. So this whole time he assumed I knew he was my father. And apparently he had a picture of me in his wallet, and that his wife found it once and ripped it, and he never saw me again or had anything from me. But he is open to meeting me whenever I'm ready. And it's been several years, and I do have a relationship with my siblings. I see my sister often. She actually lives 10 minutes away from my mom's house. That means my bio father lives like 10 minutes from my mom's house, and they live about 15 minutes from where I live now. So I do see my sister often. We hang out on our birthdays or like right after Christmas, that type of thing. And I see my brother every time he's in town. But I have not asked to meet my father. I'm nervous, and it's not necessarily that I'm nervous to meet him. I'm nervous because I do not know what to do with my relationship with the dad that raised me. He has not spoken to me in the past 5 years. And again, I always go back to, do I need to try harder? My perception of him changed a lot when I found out he wasn't my real father. I used to think he was not a good father. I used to think he needed to put more of an effort to have a better relationship with me. But after I found out, I realized he's a good person. I realized that he tried his best, especially not coming from a stable household. He has a lot of demons, and keeping this big of a secret was probably very difficult for him. So I'm actually grateful that he took on that challenge, and I can see that at his core he's very kind. And I just feel like meeting my bio father is going to make my feelings more complicated. But now I have 2 kids. When I found out I was single, 27. Now I have 2 kids. I have a 4-year-old and a 9-month-old baby. And I do want to meet my father this year. And I want to make sure I know who he is, so that my kids can know where they come from. once they're a little bit older, I do want to share the story. And I want to make sure that I meet my bio father now that it's an option, and I don't want to regret it later in life where it might not be an option anymore. Out of this experience, I just want to break the cycle. I want to not keep secrets. I want to make sure in my house we tell the truth. Especially for my kids, I want to make sure that they feel comfortable with me to share anything and everything, and that they know that I will support them and I'll be there for them. And I know what it means to be lied to for so many years, that I just don't want any of that to be part of my little family now. And I think part of breaking that cycle is to meet my father and ask him questions. And I do want him to explain a little more, because the story has a lot of holes in it. I guess the story doesn't have an end yet, and I'm getting there, and it's been a very slow process for me. Again, I think it all stems from not having that freedom to talk too much when I was a kid. And that's why it's taken me so long to open up and share my story and ask more questions. And at this point, my mom has dementia. So I don't think she's the right source to now explain a lot of these things.
Yeah.
And I can only rely on what my bio father has to say. So I'll be doing that soon. I'll be brave enough to get it done.
I was nodding along so much because I too was an obedient daughter, that didn't ask a lot of questions. But I can see how considerate you are as a person, even in the way you called yourself an overthinker, and how you write to your sister and what day and what time. And I'm like, really, you just sound so considerate and thoughtful. And your story and how the pace, kind of the slower pace, I mean, a lot of people will get some great ideas about that, about, slowly, how exciting to have those FaceTime calls. And then you met your brother and you've been developing these relationships with your siblings. And I really just wish you the best of luck in meeting your biological father in person. That sounds scary, but exciting.
This is the last step. So I feel ready now.
Liz, if people wanted to reach out to you personally, would you be okay with that?
Yes, of course.
And what would be the best way for them to get in contact with you?
They can send me an email. My email is Lizette, Lizette, .rmc@gmail.com.
I will put your email address in the show notes below. And Liz, I really appreciate you sharing this story. I was quiet for most of it because honestly, I was just nodding along. And the way you described your feelings so beautifully, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story today.
No, thank you, Lily, for creating this space. It's been very helpful, and hopefully my story will be useful for someone out there too.
These stories are here for us to identify with. If you are an NPE and would like to share your story, email npestories@gmail.com. You do not have to give any identifying information. If you are an NPE and would like to share your story, I'd like to hear from you. Subscribe to this podcast to hear more. Come heal with us.